Right now, your home feels like a safe, warm box. But in a long winter outage, it can flip on you and turn into something closer to a giant cooler. The hidden flaw isn't just no power, it's what happens after the heat stops, when your walls, floors, and furniture become a cold battery that soaks up every bit of warmth you try to make. Most people waste their fuel trying to heat the house and can't figure out why they're still freezing indoors. In this video, I'll break down the simple physics behind that icebox effect, the biggest mistakes people make in the first couple of days, and the practical way to stay warm by building a small, controllable warm zone inside your home. Keep watching, because the fix is simple, but only if you understand what your house is really doing. Number 1, the comfort trap. Your house feels warm in normal life for one simple reason. The heat supply never really stops. The thermostat cycles the system, the walls stay near room temperature, the floors aren't stealing heat from your feet, and the air is constantly being mixed and rewarmed. The moment the grid is gone and your main heat source shuts off, the whole setup changes fast. A lot of people imagine a blackout like this. The air cools down, you light some kind of backup heater, and you're back to normal. But a modern home doesn't behave like a simple box of air. The air cools first, then your body starts feeling the bigger problem: the cold surfaces around you. Even if a thermometer still reads a not horrible number, the room can feel harsh because your skin is losing heat in multiple ways at once. Heat leaves your body through convection, air moving around you. Conduction, touching cold floors, cold furniture, cold walls. And radiation, your body sending heat toward colder surfaces. This is why two rooms at the same air temperature can feel totally different. In a grid-down winter scenario, the first big shift is that your house stops being actively managed. No fans balancing temps, no steady input replacing losses, no routine cycles topping things off. That's when people discover the hidden flaw. Your house isn't just holding warm air. It's a whole system of materials that can store heat, lose heat, and later resist warming back up. That's the part that turns a temporary chill into a slow, stubborn, deep cold problem. And it's also why beginner prepping needs to focus less on big heroic heating plans and more on controlling what you can control: the smallest space, the smallest volume, and the fewest surfaces stealing your heat. That mindset is the difference between feeling uncomfortable and sliding into a dangerous cold stress situation without noticing it. Number 2, heat lives in the stuff. Here's the idea that clears up most confusion. Heat isn't only in the air. A huge chunk of the warmth you're used to is stored in thermal mass, meaning the physical stuff in your home: drywall, wood framing, furniture, floors, countertops, even books and clothes. When your home sits at 68 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit day after day, all that material is also around that temperature. It's basically a big heat reservoir. Your heating system doesn't just warm the air. Over time, it warms the whole building. When power fails, that stored heat starts leaking out through every surface and every tiny crack where cold air sneaks in. Insulation slows the leak, but it doesn't stop it. Over time, the entire house drifts toward the outdoor temperature. The dangerous moment is when the building materials themselves become cold. Once the couch, the floor, the walls, and the objects around you are cold, your body is constantly paying a heat tax just to exist in that space. Touch a cold wall and you'll feel it instantly, but even without touching anything, you're still exchanging heat with those surfaces. This is why people say, "I'm indoors but I can't get warm," even when they're wrapped up. The environment isn't just cold air, it's cold mass all around you pulling heat away. And if the home is well sealed, the temperature may stabilize at a low level that feels weirdly stuck. People sometimes think the house should warm up quickly once they run a heater for a while, but the heater is fighting an entire building that's acting like a cold sponge. For prepping for beginners, the takeaway is simple. Don't plan as if you're only heating air. In a winter blackout, you're dealing with the temperature of the whole structure, and the structure is the heavyweight in the room. If you don't account for thermal mass, you'll overestimate what a small heater can do, underestimate how fast comfort disappears, and burn through supplies chasing a normal feeling that isn't coming back the same way. Number 3, insulation cuts both ways. Insulation is usually sold like a shield. It keeps the cold out and keeps the warm in. What it really does is slow temperature change in either direction. It resists heat flow. That sounds like the same thing, but the direction matters a lot after a collapse-style outage. While you have steady heat input, insulation is your friend because it slows your heat losses. But once your house becomes cold all the way through, the same insulation can work against your comfort because it slows heat coming back in. This is why coolers and thermos bottles work. They don't care whether you're trying to keep something hot or keep something cold. They just resist change. A well-insulated home can end up behaving like a giant cooler. If it reaches a cold equilibrium and you don't have enough energy input to rewarm the mass, your efficient envelope can trap you in a stable cold state. Add air leakage to the mix and it gets more complicated. Many homes are insulated but still leaky. That means you lose heat through the building materials and through air exchange. Cold air sneaks in low. Warm air leaks out high, especially in windy weather. That constant exchange can pull heat out faster than you expect, even if your attic has great insulation. So the hidden flaw isn't insulation is bad. The flaw is thinking insulation automatically equals survivable warmth without continuous energy. In preparedness terms, insulation buys time, not comfort. It slows the slide, but it does not create heat. And once the house is cold, insulation can slow your ability to recover, especially if your recovery plan is a small heat source trying to warm a large volume. This is where many prepper tips miss the mark. People focus on the thickness of insulation, but forget the reality of heat budgets and the physics of rewarming cold mass. A beginner prepper plan should treat insulation like a timer. It gives you more hours before things get critical, and it makes a small warm zone strategy more effective. But insulation alone doesn't save you. The plan has to match what insulation actually does. Slow change, not prevent it. Number 4. The why is my heater useless moment. A lot of prepping and survival videos talk about backup heat in terms of output. This heater makes X BTU, so it will heat Y square feet. That's not totally wrong, but it's incomplete. Those ratings often assume normal indoor starting conditions, decent air mixing, and a building that isn't already fully cold-soaked. In a real winter grid failure, your house might be starting at a low temperature, and more importantly, the building materials are cold. When you run a small heater in that situation, the first thing that happens is not the room gets cozy. The first thing that happens is the heater's output gets swallowed by cold surfaces. Warm air rises, hits a cold ceiling, cools, falls. It keeps circulating, and the room can feel drafty even with no wind. Meanwhile, the floor stays cold, furniture stays cold, and anything you touch feels like it's pulling heat right out of you. Open floor plans make this worse because you're trying to heat a huge connected air volume. High ceilings make it worse because you're heating air you don't even live in. Big windows make it worse because they're fast heat loss surfaces, and they also stay cold and radiate cold toward you, meaning your body radiates heat toward them more aggressively. Another problem is expectation. People expect one device to replace a whole house system. Modern HVAC isn't just heat, it's distribution. It pushes warmth into every corner, and it constantly evens things out. A single point source heater doesn't do that. It creates a warm bubble and a cold bubble, and the boundary between them can feel brutal. This is why a family can be sitting 10 feet apart and having totally different experiences. In a collapse preparation mindset, this is the trap. You keep feeding fuel into a plan that was never sized for the real problem. You can have a decent heater and still feel like you're losing. Not because the heater is bad, but because you're trying to warm an entire cold-soaked structure instead of creating a small, livable micro-environment. Once you understand that, a lot of freezing house fix advice suddenly makes sense. It's not about getting a bigger flame. It's about shrinking the thermal job to something your resources can actually handle. Number 5, shrink the problem. The most practical shift you can make, especially for survival prepping for beginners, is to stop thinking heat the house and start thinking heat a space I can actually maintain. You're not abandoning your home. You're changing how you use it. In a long winter outage, The house becomes your weather shell. It blocks wind, snow, and rain, and it gives you security and storage. But your living area becomes a smaller zone inside that shell. This is what people mean by a microclimate, and it's not a gimmick, it's basic energy math. Heating a small room takes far less energy than heating an entire open layout. It also reduces how much cold surface area you're exposed to at any moment. The best microclimate spaces are usually interior rooms with fewer exterior walls. Think small bedroom, office, or even a large walk-in closet, depending on the home. Bathrooms can work in some houses because they're small, but they can also be drafty and have more moisture issues, so it depends. What matters most is volume and exposure. Less volume is easier to warm. Less exterior wall contact means fewer pathways for heat loss. Once you pick the zone, the goal is to reduce air exchange with the rest of the house. Closed doors matter. Gaps under doors matter. Hallways that act like chimneys matter. You're trying to keep whatever warmth you create from leaking out into the cold mass of the rest of the building. This is where prepping hacks can actually be practical. Simple draft blocking and internal barriers can change comfort more than buying another gadget. And this approach scales. If it's just one person, the zone can be very small. If it's a family, you may pick a bigger room, but still keep it contained. The main principle stays the same. Heat the minimum livable space, not the entire building. That's how you stretch limited fuel, limited battery power, and limited daylight into something that can last. It's also the strategy that doesn't require fantasy-level stockpiles. It's realistic home preparedness. Number 6, make an inner room. Once you've chosen the space, the next step is creating an inner room effect. The key idea is to separate your body from cold surfaces. You're not trying to remodel anything. You're creating layers. Soft materials like blankets, quilts, and sleeping bags don't have magic warmth by themselves. What they do well is trap still air. Still air is the insulation. So you can use common household textiles to create an interior boundary between you and the cold mass of the walls. Hanging thick fabric to create a barrier can reduce how much radiant heat you lose to cold surfaces, and it can also cut drafts inside the room. Floor comfort is a big deal because cold floors drain heat through your feet and legs. If you can, add layers on the floor where you sit and sleep. Rugs, spare blankets, foam pads, even flattened cardboard under a blanket as a temporary thermal break. For sleeping, focus on getting your body off the floor and reducing contact with cold surfaces. In blackout survival, your sleep system is often more important than your heat source because sleep is when you're still for hours and your body temperature can drop. In a beginner prepper setup, a simple but effective idea is to treat your sleep space like a mini shelter within the room. Layers underneath, a good insulating layer around you, and a way to reduce drafts. Keep the warm zone tidy and controlled. If you spread out across the cold house during the day, you end up constantly rewarming yourself. Staying mostly within the microclimate reduces that up and down stress. Also, keep the essentials in that zone. Lighting, water you need soon, basic first aid, chargers/power banks, and whatever you use to track time and weather updates. That reduces trips through the cold. One more piece people forget. Light and heat are linked. Darkness makes cold feel worse and makes people more likely to make sloppy choices. Reliable lighting, headlamps, lanterns, extra batteries, matters for comfort and safety. And when you're picking batteries, it's easier to think in everyday terms. Stock AA and AAA in bulk for common devices, plus whatever your specific gear needs. All of this is basic family preparedness. You're building a controllable bubble that can stay stable while the rest of the structure becomes a cold storage shell. Number 7, warmth priorities. In a long cold outage, you get the best results by stacking warmth in the safest order. First priority is clothing and layering. The goal isn't to dress like you're going outside for 10 minutes. It's to stay stable indoors for hours. Multiple thin layers usually work better than one bulky layer because you can adjust as conditions change. Dry matters more than most people think. If you sweat, then cool down. You get colder fast. So you want warmth without overheating. Second priority is hands, feet, and head. If those are cold, everything feels worse and you lose dexterity, which makes every task harder. Third priority is sleep warmth, because that's when your body is least active. A solid sleeping bag or layered bedding setup can do more for survival than running a heater all night. Fourth priority is spot heat, meaning warming people and small areas, not trying to raise the temperature of a whole house. Warm drinks and warm food help with comfort and morale, but don't treat them like they solve cold exposure. They're support, not the main system. When people talk about emergency heating tips, this is the part that gets skipped. Your body is the thing that has to stay in range. Everything else is optional. About heaters, fuel-burning heat sources and generators can be dangerous if misused, especially indoors, because of fire risk and carbon monoxide. So for a teen audience and a family setting, the safest framing is simple. Any combustion-based heat source should only be handled by a responsible adult, using equipment specifically designed for the situation, following the manufacturer's instructions, and with working carbon monoxide alarms in the home. Avoid improvised or DIY heating setups. A lot of winter blackout deaths don't come from not enough gear. They come from unsafe heating choices made under stress. If your household doesn't have a safe, rated, well-understood backup heat plan, it's smarter to lean harder on the microclimate strategy, insulation layers, sleep systems, and staying dry, rather than trying to wing it with something risky. Preparedness is not just having heat. It's having heat without creating a second emergency. Number 8. Water and indoor freeze problems. Once the house temperature drops, water becomes a whole separate issue. Drinking water can freeze in containers if it sits in the cold part of the house, and if temperatures go low enough, plumbing can freeze too. For home preparedness, the practical move is to keep the water you'll need soon inside the microclimate zone where it's warmer. Even if most of your stored water stays elsewhere, rotate smaller amounts into the warm zone so you always have liquid water ready. Plumbing is trickier because every home is different. The safe preparedness angle is to know the basics before an emergency, where the main water shutoff is, how to access it, and what your household plan is if pipes are at risk. If you don't know, that's a good prepping for beginners task to do ahead of time with a parent or another responsible adult. In a real crisis, trying to learn plumbing under pressure is a bad time. Moisture is the other quiet problem. When people live in a small, warm zone, breathing, cooking, drying damp clothes, humidity builds up. That moisture can condense on cold surfaces, making things feel colder and creating dampness problems over time. The balance you're aiming for is controlled airflow without turning your warm zone into a wind tunnel. In normal life, ventilation is handled for you by the building and the HVAC cycles. In an outage, it becomes a manual habit, keeping an eye on condensation, keeping fabrics from staying wet, and making sure the air doesn't feel stale. If your household uses any kind of fuel-burning heat, air safety becomes even more important, which is why carbon monoxide alarms with fresh batteries belong on every prepper essentials list. Again, the main point is not complex. Cold emergencies create chain reactions. Water, moisture, and temperature all interact. The microclimate approach makes temperature manageable, but it also means you need to pay attention to where you store water and how you keep the warm zone dry enough to stay comfortable day after day. Number 9. Use the cold house like a tool. When your home becomes icebox cold, it's not only a threat, it can also be useful if you handle it carefully. The cold part of the house can act like a natural refrigerator for certain foods, which matters because your powered fridge and freezer won't behave the same without electricity. The simple preparedness move is to treat food in categories. Shelf-stable foods are the backbone. Canned goods, dry staples, ready-to-eat items, and things that don't require long cooking. That's standard prepper stockpile logic, and it still works. Cold perishable foods are trickier. If your house is consistently cold, it can extend the life of some perishables, but you still need to be cautious about spoilage and cross-contamination. Keep it simple. Keep foods sealed. Keep raw items separated. And when in doubt, don't gamble on questionable food in a situation where medical help may be limited. Medicine storage matters too, because some meds don't like freezing, and some don't like heat. A basic family preparedness habit is to check what your household relies on and store it in the most stable temperature spot you can manage, often inside the microclimate zone. Power management is another piece people overlook. In a grid-down winter, battery life can feel like time itself. The beginner-friendly approach is to standardize your gear around common batteries where possible. Again, AA and AAA are usually the easiest to stock, plus have rechargeable options and power banks for phones and radios. Keep charging simple and prioritized. Communication and lighting first, everything else second. A small routine helps. Check weather updates at set times, keep devices off the rest of the time, and avoid draining batteries with constant scrolling. Light discipline isn't about being dramatic. It's about stretching what you have. If you're making a home preparedness plan, assume you'll be doing more with less. Less light, less heat, less water pressure, less normal convenience. The microclimate room becomes the hub where you keep the critical stuff organized so you're not constantly hunting through a freezing house for a headlamp or a charger. Number 10. Fix the flaw before you need it. The easiest time to deal with the icebox house problem is before the outage, not during it. This doesn't mean a full renovation. It means small, high-impact improvements and practice. Air leaks are a big deal because moving air carries heat away fast. Weather stripping, draft reduction, and simple window coverings can reduce how quickly the home loses heat and can make a microclimate room dramatically easier to maintain. Heavy curtains, temporary window insulation film, and sealing obvious gaps are boring tasks, but they pay off. Another practical move is to pre-select your microclimate room and store a small kit there. Extra blankets, a few sleeping pads, a thermometer, headlamps, spare batteries, a basic first aid kit, and a way to charge essential devices. If you want an advanced tool, a thermal imaging phone attachment can help you spot cold drafts and heat leaks, but it's optional. The real advantage comes from rehearsing the plan once. Pick a cold evening, turn your heat down for a few hours, and try living in the microclimate room with the door closed, using only the lighting and layers you'd use in an outage. You'll learn fast what's missing. Maybe the floor is too cold, maybe the room needs better draft control, maybe you don't have enough warm bedding. Maybe your lighting plan is weak. That kind of low-stress practice is one of the best prepper tips for beginners because it turns guessing into knowing. Another part of collapse preparation is social, not technical. Decide in advance how your household handles a longer outage, who checks on neighbors, and how you communicate if cell service is unstable. Keep it realistic. The core is still the same physics. When power stops, your house slowly becomes cold mass, and cold mass is hard to reverse with limited resources. So you plan around what works. Reduce the space, reduce heat loss, protect sleep warmth, organize essentials, and build a routine that keeps the warm zone stable without relying on constant fuel burn or risky improvisation.